Oh, Tay. I think I did it right. Anyway, welcome back. I'm John Stark from AmericanMovieGuy.com, your favorite blind film critic. And I'm celebrating the 30th anniversary of The Little Rascals. Yeah, this movie came out in 1994. Um, and I have some stuff to talk about. I did see this with audio description, so if you can find it with audio description, good for you. It does exist, and it's not ancient either. It doesn't sound like, it sounds more like last 20 years instead of like dawn of man, like some of those tapes that used to be made back in the day. Um, so, so this is not my first time watching Little Rascals. First of all, I need to clear that up because the things I'm going to say are reflective. And if you've been watching some of my other anniversary movies, you know that I've given a pass to a lot of things because I'm a very nostalgic person. I always feel like being honest. Like, like I love saying exactly where my biases come from. And if I'm nostalgic and I loved a movie before, I'm still gonna, and I'll have like a hard time. Some of these films, it's like, they're so entrenched that I don't even know how to conceptually grade a movie anymore because it makes me too happy. Like it's a comfort movie. It's like I can acknowledge the fact that it is not up there with, Citizen Kane and The Godfather and Shawshank, but I'm still going to give it the same grade. Uh, so, anyway, but Little Rascals is not that for me. But I was a kid when this came out. So for people who are like, well, you're an adult and you're being mean to a kid's movie, it's like, I need you to understand that I was a kid when this movie came out. So just think about it as being like, I just, it's like 30 years of the same opinion. So there you go. I was the target demographic. When this movie came out, I was only like a couple years older than Bug Hall, who plays Alfalfa in this. He was one of the older cast members in this. And one of the ones to sort of go on and do other things. Like 2 years later, he was in The Stupids. But, this is not, I don't like this movie. Said Sam I Am, I do not like Green Eggs and Ham. It's directed by Penelope Spears, who is most noted. I know she'd be noted for like, who wants to be noticed for some other things according to her IMDb profile. But I was like, why do I know this name? And I was like, oh, Wayne's World. Of course, she's the director of Wayne's World. Like, duh. So she has a really good movie under her belt. Yes, I use that term for Wayne's World. I love Wayne's World. It's just not an anniversary year, so you're gonna have to wait for that to come back around, and I'll do a review of it. But she's also got Black Sheep, which I like because I like the chemistry between David Spade and Chris Farley, and I think had Chris lived, we would have gotten more of that. So, but the fact that I only have 2 David Spade, Chris Farley movies means that inherently I have to like Black Sheep because I like their chemistry. It's not Tommy Boy. I'm not saying it is because I know a lot of people don't like Black Sheep, but I still like it because I have very little options with Chris Farley movies. And I'm not gonna, sadly, despite the tragic, pairing of Farley and Matthew Perry in Almost Heroes, the films like that just weren't funny. So she has Black Sheep. She has some other things. She's also really into like rock music and she's done some documentary stuff. She's followed some bands, all that kind of stuff. So she's done both, which is why she was a logical director for Wayne's World. She's not a logical director for The Little Rascals, though, except for the fact that she's like 80. So she was around when the Little Rascals TV show in the 50s existed and probably remembered that from her own childhood. And so she was directing from that place. But there were also the Our Gang shorts from like the 30s. And I know that a lot of the people who were previous Rascals or gangs were just upset that they were not included in this production. Because they could have been like in the background and stuff like that. But I guess like a whole bunch of them were not. Um, Spears has also, uh, she's also mentioned that this was a trying shoot for her because she had a bunch of child actors who couldn't remember their lines, which was very obvious to me, even as a child. Like, I remember sitting there and you could tell the kids were looking off camera for lines. Like, they were clearly being held on cue cards. Um, I I don't like bashing child actors, but they're now grown up. It gives me sort of like, it's like weird. It's like I was a kid when this movie came out, so if I had been my age and if I had gone on social media and made the comments, nobody would have said anything because the kid actor making fun of kid actors. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that. But now that I'm adult, I feel like I have to make general statements rather than call out specific actors because they were still kids when the movie came out. One of them was 4. The girl who played Darla, she was born in 1989. The movie came out in 1994. It had to shoot before that. So she would have been 4 when this movie shot. Um, but, so it's not her fault. It's a casting director. Somewhere along the way, a casting director had picked these kids and didn't check to see whether or not any of them could act or memorize lines. And that's the problem, which is why, I sort of miss, we used to have what, like the Young Hollywood or Young Artist Awards or whatever. Those used to be a thing where they sort of recognize the excellence in youth acting. Oscars don't do that. Golden Globes don't do it. We don't do enough of it. And it's, when you watch this movie, there really is a difference. There are a couple kids here who can act, and there are a bunch of kids who can't. And there are times in this movie where they had to take the shot and then add the line in post because the kid missed his line. So, like, a line will be said and the kid's mouth wasn't moving. And there are times when one of the actors is constantly looking off camera, looking like in a scene where they're supposed to be looking directly at somebody. It's one of those like over the shoulder shots. And the fact that Spheres kept this shot makes me wonder, like, how many times did you do this scene and what were the other takes like? But you can see that the actor's eyes are wandering when she speaks, like off to a cue card that's clearly off camera. It's pretty obvious. And I'm saying this now as a blind film critic because this has stuck with me for 30 years. So, I saw the comments online, and there are people who are like, oh, what are adults expecting from a kids movie? And it's like, okay, I need you to understand I was the target demo for this movie when it came out. So it's been 30 years. And I think if you're going online and yelling at adults for not liking the Little Rascals, you need to check and find out, were they the kids of the time period that are now speaking as adults who also don't like this movie still? Of course, there's the whole incel nature of the Little Rascals, the He-Man Woman Haters Club, which does not play well, which is why I'm not sure we'll ever see the Little Rascals ever again. Now, I don't mind that so much because the kids are so young that you're just like, it reminds me so much of Cooties and stuff like that, and when kids were a little bit more segregated in terms of gender. Boys hung out with boys and girls hung out with girls. And I don't know. It's like it kind of changes, but it depends on where you grew up and who you grew up with. A lot of things were always based around, I don't even know if kids play outside anymore. Like, there are so many neighborhoods that are just unsafe that I think everybody just plays inside and it's all like play dates. I don't even know like what a modern Little Rascals would look like. Do people build tree houses anymore? Like, does this play at all? But every time, I had 2 places that I lived in my childhood, and it was always just like whoever was in the neighborhood, which for some reason was always boys. like in my age range, everyone was always a boy. And there wasn't like, and I knew the homes, and it wasn't like there was a girl that was hanging out inside. Do you know what I'm saying? Who didn't feel like coming out because we were boys. There just weren't any girls. Just for some reason, every parent in my adjacent area had produced a male that was in our age range. So very weird. I mean, I had people who had older sisters, and they were like the younger brother. I had friends like that, but like I could have lived in both Little Rascals situations, and people would have been like, "Are you including the girls?" And I'd be like, "Where are they? Find one that's in our age range." There isn't one. So I can see it. I don't know that it needs the name, but like you could easily continue to make movies that don't have, because I think that's still a reality for people. It's kind of just based on where you live. And if you live in a neighborhood, I kind of wonder if that's the same thing for girls. If girls have ever been in a neighborhood and there's like a whole bunch of girls and no boys, good for you. Um, so maybe you could play that aspect of it, but like I don't know how this film resonates today if you were trying to remaking The Little Rascals, like the kind of changes you'd have to make to satisfy an audience nowadays. Um, but no, and she's admitted the fact that the kids couldn't remember their lines, and it's a problem on screen. Um, but whose problem is it? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the kids. It is not the kids' problem, and that's what I want to really draw the line here. Is in saying I'm not trying to say these kids are bad actors, because if I grab a child off the street and throw him into a movie and I didn't check to see whether or not he could act, it's not that kid's fault. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not they didn't do anything. They just uh but it does really go to highlight, when we get a really terrific child actor performance from somebody like Jacob Tremblay and we don't recognize it, how asinine it is, because it's like, have you seen some of the other stuff? Like there are kids out there that really have a hard time delivering dialogue. They can't remember their lines. I'm sure this film was costing reshoot. Like they had to keep like reshooting the same scene over and over. And then she probably just gave up. You know what I'm saying? Like, and of course you can't be mean to kids. That's a career ender. Penelope Spears choosing to direct a movie where she knew she was going to be working with child actors. What's the old adage in Hollywood? The two things you don't work with: animals and kids, right? Well, she chose to work with a thing full of kids. Um, so she knew, but there's still a casting process. There's still a process where you sit down at the table when everybody comes in, and at that time, you have the opportunity to ask kids to memorize lines and to come back in and have a line memorized. And if a kid can't memorize a line of dialogue and give it to you, if a kid can't do a cold read, there was nothing that was saying that Darla needed to be a 4-year-old. I mean, that's a little young. It feels a little young. Bug's not the same age. Bug was like 3 years older than her. So why is his love interest 3 years younger than him? Why are we perpetuating this weird thing where men date younger girls in this age range? I mean, so it's it just doesn't work. And it's some of it is cute, and there was actually a great amount of detail that went into pulling a lot from the old shorts, a lot of situations, a lot of the gags. So it kind of feels like you're taking kids from the 1930s and throwing them into like the 90s, because they're doing a lot of the gags that the kids did in the original shorts, in the Our Gang shorts, and they sort of have that same look to them. And even though the audio description doesn't go that much into it, they do. They have basically like the same look. They really don't look that modern for the 90s. But yeah, it's an interesting little film. And I think I saw somebody say something about how it didn't do well at the box office, and I'm like, I don't know if it did or not, but I know that people have done that. I got a pickle. I got a pickle. I got a pickle. Hey, 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 hey. Hey. Man, I've heard a bunch of people do that. So obviously, this film is from their childhood, and that's the thing that they remember from the movie. So uh, I just hear that randomly at some point. I'm like, oh, you watched The Little Rascals, didn't you? You did. I think I've seen this movie at least twice. So this is at least my third time through because I did remember it pretty well. The scene on the boat with Bug and the girl who plays Darla. Yeah, I remember that, and that's my least favorite scene. And I'm trying to really avoid calling out specific actors. So, um, but God, I'm not for it. Like I was really when the Razzies gave the nomination to Ryan Kiera Armstrong, I was like, no, that's rude. Get her off your list. First of all, she wasn't that bad in the movie. She was definitely not the problem with Firestarter, and she's been excellent on Skeleton Crew. But that's rude to put a child actor on your list. So, because again, it's not their fault, and it's okay for these kids to show up to an audition and to hear you're not ready. You know what I'm saying? Take a few more classes, work on memorizing some lines, and then come back because they're young, and they'll continue to be young. So a year from now, they might land another audition, and get into something else. And just because you heard no at 4 doesn't mean your life is over, or no at 5. They could have said no to these kids and just kept trying to find kids who would remember dialogue. I guess if you're really caught up in the idea that they have to look like the people previously, but I don't even know if that's 100% true that everybody matches what they look like previously. And by the way, they didn't use there are more Rascals than this. There are like 40 of them, and they use like 14. So our gang is much larger than this. I like the audio description, and the audio description has to be fair, and it can't point out the things that I'm talking to you about. I know you're like, blind film critic, are you really blind? It's like, yes. I've really, for 30 years, remembered that these kids were like dubbed in post, looking off camera for lines. Like for 30 years. And I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, what is going on here? Because I'm watching movies with kids in them all the time. I'm watching TV shows with kids in them all the time. Like, I loved my childhood, and it was full of stuff like this. And 1994 was such a great year for maybe not movies with 4-year-olds, but it was a great year for movies aimed at kids, like Angels in the Outfield and Little Big League and Iron Will, and I know that has a much older actor in it. I didn't want to say Iron Will, but it did come out in 1994. Just a bunch of Disney movies that came out that year, in addition to other studios that were pandering towards kids. Plus, we had already seen a couple of really young child performances. I mean, Mara Wilson has already been in Mrs. Doubtfire at this point, She'll do Miracle on 34th Street in the same year. I think she's pretty young. She probably could have been in Little Rascals. And of course, Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, another great child actor performance of this time period. So, and also Kieran, by the way, in the same movie. You can find them. You have the ability, you can find them. It's not hard. And I think that's where this film lost me. But it lost me not as this old man that you're sitting here thinking like, it's an old man making fun of a kid's movie. No, it lost me when I was 10. It lost me way back in the day. So yeah, I can't give Little Rascals the thumbs up that I know it wants to have. There's something about it where it's like I like it going for the nostalgia, and clearly that's what Spheres was interested in. You know, there's some of that in Wayne's World, but her follow-up to this is the Beverly Hillbillies movie. So, I mean, she was clearly going for something in his time period. But yeah, it's kind of disappointing for the director from Wayne's World. Anyway, um, it's I think your kids might like it, but your kids also might notice. I noticed. So I don't know, you know, like I guess some people have liked this film and some people are just like, well, they're just kids. And it's like, yeah, but there are kids in like other things and they're not looking off camera for cue cards. You know, it's not their fault. Um, I'm gonna give the Little Rascals a C minus. There's also a really fun cameo here for those of us who live in hell now. Uh, I saved that for the end. You didn't think I wasn't going to talk about it, but there's a certain somebody here who ran into Kevin McAllister in Home Alone 2, who plays the father to the boy you're not supposed to like, the wealthy boy who is also trying to get with Darla. I say that, but I mean that in like elementary school terms. I don't think they're not doing anything. Um, but like the opposite of alfalfa, basically. I forget the kid's name. I don't think it's important, but you know, he's wealthy, so of course his father in 1994 was Donald Trump. Of course it was, because so he's here for a hot second, along with Reba McEntire making a cameo. So um, I mentioned it; it's there. So as you think about the coming next 4 years of your life, just remember Donald Trump played the parent of the kid you're not supposed to like in The Little Rascals. Merry Christmas. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you guys on the other side.